Welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is John. This reports for the 19th. Well, we got a big CME, coronal mass ejection, heading our way. Should be arriving in a couple of days. So markets got very excited about that. As we can see, futures taking a pretty good sized dump. But the reality is, it may be more the fact that it looks like the EU is going to war with the US over this Greenland issue. Who started what first? I don't know. I think it's a little bit irrelevant at that point. I think what Trump realizes is the EU is set on a course to go to war with Russia. They've declared it. He realizes that they need to create their own defense for the U.S. So um, it's an interesting situation because it's just going to deteriorate all around. Then throw in all of the domestic, blah 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 blah, and you just got, a spring of chaos is where we're going to be headed once the winter clears. So that'll be interesting. But you can see strong activation of shorts. When we talked about this, it was all about Magenta staying above 25. Once you begin to fade below that, you just don't have the strength to support any of your areas down. We're still at the 76%, so not exactly a trauma. Plenty of room lower than that. From an NQ standpoint, already at the 50%. So that is where you're seeing the real activity. And, some of the AI trade combined with all the chip stuff, a lot of circular movement back and forth, a lot of commitments to spend in the future, all amongst the same companies. And, it at some point it's just not going to result in actual earnings. But yeah, there's that. That's a separate issue, and it's going to work its way through. But already back at the 50%, and you can see the bifurcation was a split that took place. Back over here, a nice little spider from a DOC, but you can never really get positive shakeout from the NQ standpoint. So it's just been problematic from a Nasdaq. When we go back to the S&P and you get the bifurcation right here, you're above the line, but again, you got to remain over that line. And once you dip back below the zero level, and you can see we turned red immediately on that. Now, it could be a blip. People are going to see this as a buy opportunity. You're going to go back and forth, fine. But broadly speaking, the U.S. economy is still on foot to do a lot of strong things. However, you get into a massive trade war, which looks like things could be headed that way because it's only going to escalate. He's put on 10% tariffs. Then February, they could start to rise to 25%. Are they going to cave on Greenland? Who knows? I mean, Trump has gotten very comfortable with the Roosevelt, carry a big stick motto. He knows there really isn't a whole lot they can do to stop the U.S. if they want to do this. So, what are you going to complain? Pretty much. Fed activity wise, again, they're absentee in this particular case. Oil, having shot up, has faded back somewhat, but still, it's well outside the range. It's not healthy from a strong rebound. I mean, it's still got all of the net positives, but I think what we're looking at is the new baseline based on inflation of kind of a permanent base there. That's the 40 euro barrel level from years back. As a baseline now because of inflation. It's just drove wages and everything up. And, once it goes up, it's very hard to get it to go the opposite direction. Almost doesn't happen ever. So the euro is very excited about this war footing here with the U.S. Nice rebound from there, but still way elevated. And, the Fed's not going to participate in, Trump's actions. And that's one of the drawbacks where if he actually had the Fed, he could really do a lot more as far as manipulation of their choices because they use the liquidity that's provided from the Fed as it is now to continue propping up their currency because their banks and everything are just a world of hurt. This is all huge news for gold. It's going to shove it over the 5K very quickly because you got to have an alternative. Will it be crypto in that? There's been some excitement from the ETH standpoint, not as much from Bitcoin. The big talk is that there just aren't anyone selling, but yeah, tell that to price clearly indicates that there are. So, yes, stakeholders are building and stuff, but still rather erratic. I don't think anyone's completely convinced that there's a wholesale agreement on that. When you look at it from the 50K standpoint, there you see the move of it way down there. And these were all off the MBI spikes that had come up, and we had the earliest one late in the afternoon. Popped up MBI white where the magenta just faded pretty quickly at that particular point and then accelerated through the day, ending, underneath yellow, though shorts had faded somewhat in there. But once futures opened up, it was pretty dramatic that the selling was going to continue. And it's pretty clear that it has. There you have it from a 5-minute chart, and pretty much flat, dead all the way across Asia and EU session so far. So that's the long and the short of it. We'll see what happens with the big power surge from the sun and what that does electromagnetically. Don't know yet. It's just another side thing, but really the geopolitical aspects and this whole issue with the Ukraine, Russia, Greenland, it's all going to continue to build. And, hey, that's the drama. You know, how it ends up, it's going to be certainly a change from what it was before. So at the end of the day, they're going to get something for it just by creating the whole situation. And that's how you move the needle. That's the long and short of it for now. As always, trade well. Have a good one.